By the time Lena Crowe sat in front of the jury, nobody in Mill Creek was asking what had happened to her anymore. They only remembered what she had done. 2 people were dead because of what happened inside Ruth Bell's old boarding house. Ruth, the retired teacher who gave Lena a clean bedroom when no one else wanted her. A neighbor who crossed the yard because he thought Ruth needed help. And 9-year-old Carly Mae was alive, but after that night, no one used the word lucky without lowering their voice. Even Blue, Ruth's old dog, became part of the story people could barely tell, because Blue had once been the first living thing in that house Lena trusted enough to touch. He slept outside her door, guarding the life Ruth was trying to help her build. That was what made the case so hard to understand. Lena had not destroyed a stranger's house. She had destroyed the place that had tried to make her human again. The prosecutor called her manipulative, dangerous, without conscience. A woman who could take kindness, wear it like shelter, then turn it into something unforgivable. Because long before a courtroom called her a monster, her own mother had called her something smaller, liar. She was 8 years old when she learned that word could erase a child. She had told the truth about the trailer under the water tower, where the walls were thin, the floor sagged in the rain, and every adult nearby seemed to hear everything except a child asking for help. Lena waited for someone grown to believe her, but her mother looked a police officer in the eye and said Lena made things up for attention. After that, Lena stopped believing truth was a door. Truth was a trap, and lying, for a while, felt like the only key she had left. But pain does not excuse what Lena became. It does not give a wounded child the right to grow up and wound others. The worst part was not that Lena lied. The worst part was that, by the end, the only person who knew where Lena's lie ended and the truth began was a girl who had stopped speaking after that night. So how does a child erased by one lie grow into a woman whose lies ruined the only home that tried to save her? In the county courthouse, Lena Crowe looked smaller than the story people had built around her. On the news, she had become a face under harsh lights, a woman in a faded jail uniform, a name spoken with disgust at gas stations, church steps, and grocery store aisles. In Mill Creek, people did not say her name softly. They said it like a warning, like proof that some people were born with something missing. But in the courtroom, she did not look powerful. She sat beside her public defender with her hands folded so tightly her knuckles had gone pale. She did not look at Ruth Bell's empty family bench for long. She did not look toward Henry Lott's relatives. And she never looked directly at Carly Mae, who sat between 2 adults with a stuffed rabbit and no words left. The prosecutor understood the silence in that room. He used it carefully. He told the jury that Lena had been given mercy and had repaid it with ruin. He called her calculating. He said she knew how to make people feel sorry for her, how to turn a hard childhood into a shield, how to stand in the doorway of a good woman's house and still choose betrayal. Lena's lawyer did not ask anyone to forget Ruth. She did not ask them to forget Henry. She did not pretend that Carly Mae's silence was something a sentence could repair. All she said was that before Lena Crowe became the woman in that chair, she had been a child in a trailer no one wanted to enter too carefully. A child who had asked for help once. A child who had learned what happened when help did not come. That did not make her innocent. It only meant the story had started long before the boarding house. Lena heard those words with her eyes lowered. Maybe she was listening. Maybe she was hiding. Nobody in the room could tell anymore. That was one of the cruelest things about her life by then. Even grief looked suspicious on her face. Outside that courthouse, Mill Creek kept moving. Trucks passed the square. The diner opened before sunrise. The water tower stood beyond the south road, rust showing beneath its white paint, watching over the trailer park where Lena had grown up. The Crowe trailer sat near the back of the lot, where rainwater collected in shallow brown pools and the porch steps leaned like they were tired of holding weight. The walls were thin enough for neighbors to hear arguments, televisions, bottles knocked over, and doors slammed hard enough to shake window glass. But when Lena was little, the sounds that mattered most never seemed to reach the right ears. Her mother, Denise Crowe, was not the kind of woman people called evil. That would have made her easier to understand. Denise was tired, proud, and selfish in the quiet ways that ruin children slowly. She could cry in front of a church volunteer and make herself look abandoned. She could smile at a school secretary and promise Lena had eaten breakfast. She could tell a man whatever he needed to hear if his wallet kept the lights on. And Lena learned early that her mother's love had weather. Some days it was warm enough to stand in. Other days, it disappeared without warning. By 8 years old, Lena knew how to read footsteps. She knew when to stay in her room. She knew when her mother's voice had gone too sweet, which usually meant company was present and the truth needed to be hidden. She knew that grown-ups liked clean stories, and her life was not clean enough to survive being told. Still, one afternoon, she tried. She told the truth to a teacher with kind eyes and a coffee stain on her sleeve. She said enough to make the teacher stop writing on the board, enough for phone calls to be made, enough for a patrol car to roll slowly into the trailer park. For 1 hour, Lena thought the world might open. Then Lena Crowe stood in the doorway, crossed her arms, and became the mother everyone needed to see. Calm, offended, almost wounded. "My daughter lies," she said. "Not screams, not accusations. Just that. Simple enough for adults to accept." And Lena, standing behind her mother in the dim hallway, felt something inside her close before anyone even left. Before Lena Crowe ever learned how to hurt people with a lie, she learned how easily a lie could protect the adults who were supposed to protect her. The trailer park sat beneath the old Mill Creek water tower, where rust bled down its white legs and rainwater collected for days. People in town knew families lived there. They knew children waited for school buses there, but knowing a place existed was not the same as looking closely at it. Lena learned that early. Her world was small: a narrow bedroom, a sagging couch, a kitchen where the cabinet doors never shut, and a mother who could become a different woman depending on who stood in front of her. In public, Lena Crowe could be charming. She could laugh with a cashier, wave at a church volunteer, and tell a school secretary that Lena was shy, dramatic, always making stories out of nothing. At home, Denise had less energy for pretending. Some days she slept through the afternoon while the television talked to itself. Some nights she left before dinner and returned after midnight smelling of beer, rain, and someone else's car. Lena understood the mood of the trailer by ordinary things: a bottle on its side, boots by the couch, her mother's voice turning too sweet, a door left open when it should have been closed. She did not have the language for what was wrong. She only knew that certain evenings made the rooms feel smaller. Adults spoke around her as if a child could not understand anything unless it was explained. But Lena understood tone. She understood footsteps. She understood when stillness was safer than questions. At school, she carried home inside her clothes: damp fabric, unbrushed hair, the faint smell of old smoke. She kept crackers in her desk when she could get them, not because she was greedy, but because hunger had taught her that food was safest when hidden. Other children noticed. Children always notice what adults pretend not to see. They called her dirty. They called her weird. They called her trailer trash before they were old enough to understand how cruel the words were. And after the day her mother gave the town permission, they called her liar. That day began with Miss Palmer. Miss Palmer was not powerful. She was one tired teacher in a school with peeling paint near the windows, and too many children who needed more than a classroom could give. But she watched Lena more carefully than most adults did. She noticed how Lena flinched when someone moved too quickly behind her. She noticed that Lena never raised her hand, even when she knew the answer. She noticed how Lena watched the classroom door like bad news might walk in at any moment. One afternoon, while the other children were outside, Miss Palmer asked her a simple question: "Are you safe at home?" Lena should have given the safe answer. By then, she already knew how to shrug. She knew how to say, "I'm fine." She knew how to smile just enough to let adults feel relieved. But Miss Palmer's voice did not sound like a form being filled out. It sounded like a door opening. So Lena told her, not everything. Not clearly. Children rarely tell the worst thing in a straight line. She spoke in pieces. About nights she stayed awake, people who came and went, being afraid to go home when her mother's mood changed, and the feeling that nobody would believe her if she said the house was not safe. Miss Palmer did not interrupt. That was why Lena kept going. For a little while, Lena believed the world might work the way children were told it worked. Tell the truth. Ask for help. A grown-up will come. And grown-ups did come. A patrol car rolled slowly into the trailer park. A woman from the county stepped around the puddles in shoes that did not belong on that road. Miss Palmer stood near the edge of the lot, holding her purse with both hands, her face tight with worry. Lena watched from the hallway as Denise opened the door. Her mother did not panic. That was the first thing Lena remembered later. Denise did not scream or curse or look guilty. She simply became softer, smaller, almost wounded. She said Lena had always wanted attention. She said Lena made up stories when she was angry. She said children from broken homes heard things on television and repeated them. Then Denise looked back at Lena, not pleading, warning, if you keep talking, you will lose even this. The county woman asked Lena a few questions, but the room had changed. With Denise standing there, every answer sounded thinner, less certain. The truth that had felt large in Miss Palmer's classroom suddenly looked messy under adult eyes. No one called Denise a liar. No one said they had enough to take a child from the home that day. They left with notes. That was what Lena remembered most. Not rescue. Notes. Papers in a folder, careful voices, a promise to follow up, the patrol car backing out of the lot. Miss Palmer looking like she wanted to do more but did not know what more she was allowed to do. Then the trailer door closed. The click of the latch sounded louder than the car leaving. For a moment, Denise said nothing. Then she turned around and slapped Lena with a sentence, not a hand. You little liar. That was all. No speech. No explanation. Just the word, placed exactly where it would stay. After that day, adults said Lena developed behavior problems. She stopped answering questions in class. She stopped crying where people could see. When Miss Palmer tried to speak with her again, Lena stared past her shoulder and said everything was fine. Because now Lena understood something she had not understood before. The truth had not failed because it was false. It had failed because the wrong people were allowed to decide what sounded real. Denise went on as if nothing had happened. Bills still gathered under magnets on the fridge. Men still came and went. Rain still made the floor soft near the kitchen door. The water tower still stood over the lot like a witness that never spoke. But Lena was different. She began to practice safer sentences. I already ate. Mom's at work. I fell. I forgot. I'm fine. At first, the lies were small and frightened. They were not meant to hurt anyone. They were blankets pulled over the parts of her life no one had protected. Every time a lie worked, it taught her something. Every time an adult accepted the easier answer, the lesson settled deeper. People did not want the truth. They wanted a version that let them leave. By the time Lena was 10, she could read a room better than most adults in it. She knew which teacher wanted honesty and which only wanted quiet. She knew which neighbor would call her mother and which would hand her a sandwich. She learned that pity could be useful if she controlled it, and dangerous if someone else did. That was the first shape her survival took. Not cruelty. Not yet. A story adjusted just enough to keep her breathing. Years later, people in Mill Creek would say Lena Crowe lied because she had no conscience. By then, maybe they were not completely wrong. But it had not started that way. It started with an 8-year-old girl standing in a dim hallway, watching adults walk away with papers in their hands, learning that the truth could knock on the door and still be sent home alone. By the time Lena Crowe turned 12, home had stopped meaning a place where someone waited for her. It meant a place she had to survive. The trailer under the water tower did not collapse all at once. It gave way slowly, in ways nobody in Mill Creek could point to and call an emergency. The refrigerator still hummed. The porch light still worked when the bulb had not burned out. Denise still signed school forms when someone pushed hard enough. From the road, it looked like a poor home, not an abandoned one. That was part of the problem. Some kinds of neglect knew how to stay just inside the lines. Denise became better at performing stability. When the school called, she sounded tired but cooperative. When a county worker came by, she apologized for the mess and said she had been picking up extra shifts. When a church volunteer brought groceries, Denise thanked her with wet eyes and promised things were finally turning around. Then the door would close, and the promise would vanish with the visitor. Lena watched it happen so many times that she stopped reacting. She learned that adults liked a mother who seemed ashamed more than a child who seemed angry. Shame made Denise look human. Anger made Lena look difficult. At school, the word liar followed her even when nobody said it out loud. If a bracelet went missing after gym class, girls glanced at Lena first. If someone wrote something ugly on a bathroom wall, a teacher asked where Lena had been. If Lena came to class late, the secretary looked at her like the excuse had already been weighed and found worthless before she opened her mouth. The label did not make Lena innocent, but it taught her something poisonous. If people were going to suspect her anyway, then being good did not feel like protection. It felt like unpaid work. For a while, Miss Palmer tried to keep reaching her. She left books on Lena's desk without making a scene. Thin paperbacks about girls who ran away, girls who survived storms, girls who found secret rooms and hidden money in families that were not blood. Lena read them at night with a flashlight under a blanket and hated how badly she wanted the endings to be true. Miss Palmer invited her to a small reading club after school. The first time Lena went, there were cookies on a paper plate and 4 other students sitting in a circle. Nobody laughed at her. Nobody asked about the trailer. For 40 minutes, Lena felt like a girl who had simply come to talk about a book. That feeling scared her more than cruelty did. Cruelty made sense. Kindness had conditions Lena could not see yet. So she stopped going. When Miss Palmer asked why, Lena shrugged and said she had better things to do. It came out sharp enough to make the teacher step back. Lena saw the hurt cross Miss Palmer's face, and for 1 second she wanted to take the words back. But apology would have opened a door, and Lena had already learned that open doors could close hard. At home, Denise started disappearing for longer stretches. Sometimes Lena found $20 under a coffee mug with a note that said, "Be good." Sometimes there was nothing but stale cereal and tap water. She became good at making hunger quiet. She drank from the sink until her stomach felt full. She stole crackers from the cafeteria and told herself it was not stealing if no one at home had remembered to feed her. The first time she took food from a gas station, her hands shook so badly she almost dropped it before reaching the door. No one stopped her. That was the terrible part. The world did not crack open. No siren sounded. No adult grabbed her wrist and demanded the truth. She walked out with a packet of crackers tucked under her shirt, and by the time she reached the road, fear had already begun turning into relief. Relief was dangerous. It made wrong things feel useful. After that, Lena became bolder in small ways. $1 from a jar near a cash register, a half-used tube of toothpaste from a classmate's overnight bag after gym, a sandwich from a church pantry when the woman at the table turned to answer the phone. Each time, she promised herself it was only because she needed it. Most of the time, that was true. Not always. Sometimes she took something because she was tired of being the only person in the room with nothing. That was the part she did not like to think about. By 13, Lena had learned how to vanish without leaving town. She knew which laundromat stayed warm after dark. She knew the diner bathroom had a lock that stuck but held. She knew the water tower cast a wide shadow in the evening, and if she sat beneath it with her knees pulled to her chest, no one bothered her unless they already wanted something. The water tower became the closest thing she had to a witness. It saw Denise's car leave. It saw Lena walk home slow when she was afraid of what waited there. It saw her sit in the dirt with a library book, pretending she had chosen solitude instead of being driven into it. One evening after a bad argument, Denise told Lena she had ruined every decent chance her mother had ever gotten. The words were not new. But that night, they landed differently. Denise had a man in the living room, and Lena understood she was not being asked to behave. She was being asked to disappear. So she did. She packed a grocery bag with 2 shirts, a paperback from Miss Palmer, and a hairbrush with half the teeth missing. She waited until the television grew loud enough to cover the front door, then stepped outside. At the edge of the lot, she looked back. The trailer was lit from inside, yellow and weak. For a moment, she thought her mother might come out. Not to apologize, not even to hold her. Just to say her name like it belonged to someone worth noticing. The door stayed closed. That was when Lena felt something inside her harden, not break. Breaking would have meant there was still an original shape to mourn. This was different. This was a child teaching herself not to reach for what had already refused her. She walked toward the diner lights near the highway, carrying everything she owned in one hand. Years later, people would ask when Lena first went bad, as if there had been a date, a line, a single decision. But the truth was quieter and more ordinary than that. She did not wake up one morning cruel. She became a girl who expected nothing, trusted little, and discovered that lies could get her through doors that truth had never opened. That night, under the water tower, Lena did not think she was choosing darkness. She thought she was choosing not to go home. The first night Lena slept away from the trailer, she did not feel free. She felt cold. Freedom, she would learn, was a word people used when they had somewhere safe to return to. Lena had a grocery bag with 2 shirts, crackers, a paperback from Miss Palmer, and no plan beyond staying out of her mother's reach. At night, Mill Creek grew strange. The diner sign buzzed near the highway. Trucks sighed at the gas station pumps. The laundromat windows glowed blue. Lena learned which places let a girl sit before someone asked questions. She learned that if she kept her story simple, adults often chose not to know more. At first, she lied only to stay indoors. "My mom's picking me up. I'm waiting for my aunt. Our car broke down." The words came easier than she wanted them to. That scared her, but not enough to stop. A good lie did what the truth had never done. It bought time. It opened a door. It made people soften for minutes. And minutes could mean warmth, food, or a place to wash her face. That was how Toby Raines first noticed her. Toby was 17, maybe 18, with a chipped front tooth and the kind of confidence that came from never being expected to become much. He and 2 other boys hung around the back of the diner, acting as if the town belonged to them because nobody else wanted the parts they claimed. He did not ask Lena if she needed help. He asked what she was running from. That made him seem honest. Lena did not understand yet that some people ask the right question only because they know how to use the answer. Toby gave her half a burger and told her she had the face of someone who could make people believe things. He said it like a compliment. Lena should have been insulted. Instead, she felt seen in a way that was warm. The boys did not treat her like a child who needed saving. They treated her like someone useful. They told her which clerk looked the other way, which church pantry asked the fewest questions, which deputy drove past the South Road at midnight. They gave her a nickname, Crow Girl. For Lena, belonging had always come with fear. With Toby's group, fear was still there, but it had a different shape. It was the fear of losing a place she had earned by being clever. So she became clever. She told a gas station clerk her little brother was sick. There was no little brother. She told a church volunteer her mother had lost her job. That part was close enough to the truth to feel harmless. She told a woman at the laundromat she had been locked out and needed to use the phone. By the time the woman turned away, Lena had learned which purse pocket held loose bills. She hated herself for that one. Not enough to return the money. That was the first time Lena understood that guilt did not always stop a person. Sometimes guilt walked beside the wrong thing, quiet and useless, while the wrong thing kept moving. Toby noticed what she could do. Soon, he began asking for little favors. Nothing that sounded serious when said out loud. Keep that clerk busy. Say you are lost. Say you are scared. People believe you when you look like they might save you. At first, Lena told herself she was only surviving. Then she told herself everyone in town had already decided what she was, so there was no point protecting a name they had ruined for her. That was when Nora Finch entered her life. Nora owned the diner, though owned sounded grander than the place deserved. It had cracked red booths, burnt coffee, and a kitchen floor that never stopped feeling slick. She caught Lena taking leftover biscuits from a tray near closing. Lena had a lie ready. Nora did not ask for it. She looked at the biscuits, then at Lena's thin arms, and said, "If you're hungry enough to steal cold bread, you're hungry enough to wash dishes for a hot plate." That was how Lena got her first clean chance. It was not much. 2 evenings a week. Dishes, trash, sweeping. Nora paid her in cash and meals, and she did not ask too many questions as long as Lena showed up on time. For a few weeks, Lena did. She liked the rhythm of the work more than she expected. Plates went in dirty and came out clean. Trash bags filled, floors dried, tables reset. In the diner, effort could change the shape of a thing. That was new to her. But Toby's group had learned the easiest way to pull Lena back. They did not threaten her. They needed her. They made her feel chosen. One Friday night, Lena was supposed to work the dinner shift. Then, Toby appeared behind the laundromat with a nervous smile and a story about trouble he could not get out of unless Lena helped him talk someone down. Lena knew he was using her. She went anyway. The next morning, she walked into the diner with a story already built. Sick mother, no phone, emergency. She had polished the lie so well it almost sounded sad enough to be true. Nora listened without interrupting. Then she said, "Don't make me stupid for trusting you." Lena felt the sentence hit harder than shouting would have. Anger rose in her because shame had nowhere else to go. She told Nora she did not need the job before the part of her that wanted to stay could catch up. Nora looked at her for a long moment. "No," she said. "You just don't know how to keep anything that might help you." Lena left with her face burning. Outside, Toby waited near the alley. He put an arm around her shoulders and called her Crow Girl again. The name felt cheaper than it had before, but it was still somewhere to stand. That night, beneath the water tower, Lena told herself Nora had looked down on her. She told herself the diner had been another cage. She told herself leaving first meant she had not been left. But deep inside, where her lies had not yet reached everything, she knew the truth. Nora had offered her a door, and Lena had chosen the people who only wanted her because she knew how to make doors open for them. Ruth Bell found Lena on a morning when the cold had made even the diner lights look tired. Lena was curled behind the building near the back steps, her grocery bag tucked under her arm like someone might steal the little she owned. Her hair was damp from the night fog. One sleeve of her shirt was torn at the cuff. When Ruth opened the back door to carry out a bag of trash, Blue stepped out first and stopped. The old dog did not bark. He only looked at her. That was why Lena did not run. Ruth Bell was 68 then, though people in Mill Creek still called her Miss Bell because she had taught half the town how to read. She was a widow, a retired teacher, and the owner of a large old boarding house on the edge of town. Years earlier, railroad men and traveling workers had rented rooms there. By the time Lena came into her life, most of the rooms were empty, the paint was peeling, and Ruth lived among old furniture, locked cabinets, and a silence too big for one woman. Ruth looked at Lena for a long moment. Then she said, "If you're sleeping on concrete, you can at least come inside and eat something warm." Lena had a lie ready. She always did. But Ruth did not ask where her mother was. She did not ask what Lena had done. She did not call the police, did not touch her shoulder, did not speak in that soft, careful voice adults used when they wanted to feel kind. She simply held the door open. That was the first thing Lena trusted. Not Ruth. The door. Inside, the diner smelled like coffee, bacon grease, and wet wool coats. Nora Finch was behind the counter, watching with the hard face of someone who cared. Lena expected Nora to send her away after what had happened with the job. Instead, Nora slid a plate of eggs toward her and said nothing. Ruth sat across from Lena while she ate. "You need a place tonight?" Ruth asked. Lena kept her eyes on the plate. "I'm fine." "No," Ruth said. "You're practiced. That's not the same." Lena hated her for that. Then she hated herself for wanting to cry. Ruth did not take her to the boarding house that first day, as if she were rescuing a stray animal. She made rules before she made promises. If Lena came, she would bathe. She would sleep in the blue room at the top of the stairs. She would go back to school or enroll in GED classes. She would work honest hours at the diner if Nora allowed it. She would not bring trouble into the house. And if she was scared, angry, or tempted to run, she would tell the truth before the truth grew teeth. Lena almost laughed at that. Truth had never been a pet in her life. It had always had teeth. But the blue room was real. It had clean sheets, a dresser with one missing handle, a lamp with a yellow shade, and a window facing the yard. There was a small water stain on the ceiling and a quilt folded at the foot of the bed. Nothing about it was grand, but the door closed. The floor did not sag. No one's boots waited by the couch. Lena stood in the middle of that room and did not know what to do with her hands. Blue solved it by walking in, turning twice, and lying down outside the doorway as if he had been assigned there. For the first few nights, Lena slept with the lamp on. She kept her grocery bag under the bed. She woke whenever the house settled. Each time, she expected someone to tell her the arrangement was over, that Ruth had changed her mind, that a mistake had been made. No one did. Morning came. Ruth made oatmeal. Blue scratched at the door. Nora let Lena wash dishes again, though she warned her there would not be another chance if she disappeared without a word. Lena nodded, ashamed, but grateful. For several months, Her life became almost ordinary. That was the miracle and the danger of it. She learned the bus schedule. She learned which diner customers tipped in quarters and which left Bible verses instead of money. She learned Ruth drank tea before bed and wrote grocery lists on the backs of old envelopes. She learned Blue hated thunder but loved sleeping against the radiator. She learned that a person could come home late from work and find a porch light left on for them without having begged for it. Some evenings, Ruth helped her with math at the kitchen table. Other nights, they sat without talking while Ruth mended towels and Lena pretended not to enjoy the quiet. Ruth did not demand every secret. That made Lena want to tell her some. Almost. But safety did not feel peaceful to Lena. It felt temporary. The cleaner the room became, the more afraid she was of dirtying it. The kinder Ruth was, the more certain Lena became that one day the kindness would stop. Hope had weight. It gave her something to lose. So Lena kept part of herself hidden. She did not tell Ruth when Toby came around the diner. She did not mention the boys who still called her Crow Girl from the alley. She did not say that sometimes she walked past the trailer park just to prove she could leave again if she had to. She did not explain that belonging to Ruth's house made her feel both safer and more trapped than she had ever felt under the water tower. Ruth noticed more than she said. One night, after Lena came home late with mud on her shoes and a lie already forming, Ruth stopped her at the foot of the stairs. "You don't have to be perfect here," Ruth said, "but you do have to be honest." Lena looked at the old woman, at the dog sleeping behind her, at the warm light spilling from the kitchen. For one terrible second, she wanted to believe that. Instead, she smiled, the small practiced smile that had once kept teachers, clerks, and county workers from looking too closely. "I know," she said. And Ruth, who had spent a lifetime teaching children to read, did not yet understand that Lena Crowe had learned to make herself almost impossible to read when the truth mattered most. The first crack in Ruth Bell's house did not come from a slammed door or a shouting match. It came from a file cabinet. Lena had been living in the boarding house for almost 6 months, when Ruth asked her to carry a box of old towels to the small room beside the pantry. The room had once been an office, back when the house rented beds to railroad men and traveling workers. Now it held tax records, yellowed school papers, broken lamps, and things old people kept because throwing them away felt too much like admitting a life was shrinking. Lena was looking for a place to set the towels when the drawer stuck open. Inside were folders labeled in Ruth's careful teacher handwriting. Former students, county notices, house repairs, names Lena did not know. Then she saw her own. Crowe, Lena. For a second, she only stared. The folder was thin. Not thick enough to hold a life. Not thick enough to hold all the nights she had waited for someone to come back, all the meals she had skipped, all the times she had made herself smaller than the danger in the room. She opened it anyway. There were copies of school attendance notes, a short letter written by Miss Palmer, a county intake form with Lena's name spelled correctly for once, and on the last page, a statement from Ruth Bell, dated years before Ruth ever opened her door to Lena. Ruth had written that she had concerns about the child's safety. She had written that Lena appeared hungry, withdrawn, and afraid to return home. She had written that follow-up was urgently needed. Lena read the words twice, then a third time, but she did not read them the way Ruth had written them. She read them through the wound Denise had left behind. She read them as proof that Ruth had known. Ruth had known there was something wrong in that trailer. Ruth had known Lena was not making everything up. Ruth had put it on paper and then gone on with her life. The truth was complicated. Ruth had been a retired substitute teacher then, called in for a few weeks after Miss Palmer got sick. She had pushed the report as far as she could. She had called twice after it vanished into the county office. She had not had the power to walk into the trailer and carry Lena out, but Lena did not know that. And worse, she did not ask. She folded the papers back into the folder with hands that had gone numb. When Ruth called from the kitchen, asking if she had found space for the towels, Lena answered in a voice so normal it frightened her. "Yeah, I'm coming." That night, Ruth made chicken soup. Blue slept under the table. Rain tapped at the windows. It should have felt safe. Instead, every ordinary thing looked false. Ruth asking if Lena wanted more bread sounded like pity. Ruth reminding her about GED class sounded like control. Ruth saying she was proud of her sounded almost cruel. as if praise could cover what had been written and filed away years too late. Lena watched Ruth's hands as the old woman washed dishes. Those hands had signed the report. Those hands had also put clean sheets on Lena's bed. That was what made the anger so confusing. It did not arrive clean. It arrived mixed with shame, longing, gratitude, and the need to punish someone for a failure too big to fit inside one person. Over the next weeks, Lena changed in small ways Ruth noticed but could not name. She came home later. She stopped sitting at the kitchen table after dinner. When Ruth asked about class, Lena gave answers with no handles on them. Fine. Good. Same as always. Blue still followed her to the stairs, but Lena stopped scratching behind his ears as often. Even tenderness began to feel like evidence against her. Ruth tried patience first. "You've been quiet," she said one evening. "I'm always quiet. Not like this." Lena smiled. "Maybe you just didn't know me as well as you thought." The sentence landed harder than Lena meant it to. Ruth looked at her for a long moment, and Lena saw hurt there. That should have stopped her. Instead, it fed something ugly, because hurt meant Ruth cared, and if Ruth cared, then Ruth had no excuse for not saving her sooner. That was the kind of logic pain can build when it wants permission to hate. Around that time, Silas Crowe came back into Mill Creek. He was Lena's half-brother, though brother had always been more of a rumor than a role. He was older by 7 years, with their mother's sharp eyes and a way of making trouble sound like loyalty. Lena remembered him in pieces. Silas stealing gas money from Denise's purse, Silas teaching her which neighbors left doors unlocked, Silas disappearing before consequences arrived. When he found Lena behind the diner, he grinned as if no time had passed. "Crow girl," he said. "Look at you, living with the church people now." Ruth isn't church people. She ain't blood either. That was all he needed to say. Silas understood the weak places in her because some of them had been built in the same house. He did not have to ask whether Ruth had rules. He knew. He did not have to ask whether Lena hated being grateful. He knew that too. He told her Denise was worse. He told her the trailer was almost empty now. He told her family had to look out for family because nobody else ever did unless they wanted to feel good about themselves. Lena knew he was bending the truth, but he bent it in a shape that fit the ache inside her. Soon she was meeting him after work. At first only for 10 minutes behind the laundromat. Then longer. Then at the gas station near the South Road. She did not tell Ruth, because Ruth would not understand. That was what Lena told herself. The first time Silas asked for money, he made it sound temporary. The first time Lena gave it, she used her own tips. The second time, she took a few dollars from the change jar Ruth kept near the back door for milk, stamps, and small emergencies. She stood with the bills in her hand for almost a full minute. She knew what it was. Not borrowing, not family, not survival, stealing. But then she remembered the folder. Ruth's signature. The years between that report and the blue room upstairs. The word urgent sitting on paper while Lena kept going home to Denise. Ruth owed her something. A voice inside Lena whispered. It was not a fair thought. It was not even fully believed. But it was useful. So Lena folded the bills into her pocket and told herself she would put them back before anyone noticed. When Ruth asked later if she had seen the missing cash, Lena shook her head before guilt could reach her face. "No," she said. "Maybe you spent it." Ruth looked confused, then tired. Blue lifted his head from the rug, and Lena felt, for the first time in Ruth Bell's house, the old familiar power of a lie entering the room and rearranging it around her. After the first lie in Ruth Bell's kitchen, the house did not immediately fall apart. That was what made it easier for Lena to keep lying. The next morning, Ruth still made coffee. Blue still scratched at Lena's door. Sunlight still came through the blue room like nothing had changed. The world had a cruel way of continuing after a person crossed a line. It made the line feel less real, so Lena told herself the missing cash was small. She told herself Ruth had forgotten where she put it. She told herself Silas needed it more. That last part was the one she held on to hardest because it made the theft sound like loyalty instead of betrayal. Silas knew how to feed that feeling. He never demanded too much at once. He arrived with apologies and stories about people who were after him, people who had cheated him, people who would hurt him if family did not step in. One more favor. One more ride. One more bit of money until he could get clear. Lena wanted to believe him because believing him made her feel like somebody's sister. Not a stray Ruth had taken in. Not a project Nora had given another chance. Blood. Silas used that word like a key. At first, Lena gave him tip money. Then she lied to Nora about why she needed an advance. Then she missed GED class because Silas said he could not wait until evening. Each choice seemed smaller when it stood alone. Together, they built a different version of Lena inside Ruth's house. A girl who listened at doorways, counted where Ruth kept things, and smiled through dinner while already planning what she would not say. Ruth noticed. She noticed Lena's answers growing polished again. She noticed the diner calling when Lena was supposed to be at work. She noticed Blue raising his head at night when Lena slipped through the back door long after the porch light had been left on. But Ruth did not accuse her immediately. That almost made it worse. Anger Lena could fight. Suspicion she could deny. But Ruth's patience sat across from her like a mirror, and Lena hated what it reflected. One Thursday night, Ruth placed a plate of stew in front of her and said, "You're letting someone pull you away from yourself." Lena laughed too quickly. "You don't know anything about myself. I know when a child is carrying somebody else's trouble. I'm not a child." "No," Ruth said. "That's why your choices count more now." The words stayed with Lena longer than she wanted them to. Because Ruth was right. Lena was not 8 anymore. She had keys to the house, a bed, a job she could still save if she tried, a woman at the table who had not given up yet. And still, when Silas called that night, Lena went. He was waiting near the closed laundromat, pacing under the buzzing light. He said he owed money. He said it was serious. He said if Lena did not help him, she would prove nobody in their family could count on her once she found something better. That cut deeper than it should have. "I don't have that kind of money," Lena said. "But she does." Lena knew who he meant before he said Ruth's name. She shook her head. "No." Silas looked almost amused. "That old woman has rooms she don't use, food she don't miss, cash tucked in envelopes like squirrels hide nuts. She got more than us because people like her always do. She helped me. She bought herself a good feeling," Silas said. "Don't confuse that with love." Lena wanted to walk away. That was the truth. She wanted to go back to the boarding house, sit at Ruth's kitchen table, and tell her about the folder, Silas, the money, and every lie before the lies grew too large to carry. For a few seconds, the right choice stood plainly in front of her. Then Silas softened his voice. "You think she'll keep you when she knows what you are?" By morning, Lena knew where the envelope was. Ruth kept it in the lower drawer of the desk in the old office, beneath county tax notices and repair estimates. Lena had seen it once when Ruth was sorting bills. The envelope held money, but more than that, it held papers Ruth needed to keep the boarding house from slipping further into debt. Insurance documents, property notices, receipts, the boring, fragile things that kept a roof legally attached to the person living under it. Lena understood enough to know it mattered. That should have stopped her. It did not. She waited until Ruth left for a church committee meeting. Blue followed her from room to room. When Lena reached the office, he stood in the doorway and watched her. "Go lie down," she whispered. Blue did not move. Her hands shook as she opened the drawer. The envelope was exactly where she remembered. Thick, cream-colored. Ruth's handwriting across the front. House tax. County. For a moment, Lena only touched it. This was not crackers from a gas station, not loose change from a jar, not a lie told to keep warm. This was Ruth's house, the blue room, the porch light, blue at the door. Lena knew that shame rose in her throat before she even lifted the envelope. Then another thought came, smaller and colder. Ruth had known. Ruth had signed a report. Ruth had a chance to save her once, and Lena had still gone home to the trailer. It was not the whole truth. It was not fair, but it arrived when Lena needed permission to keep moving. She took the envelope. That evening, Ruth came home with rain on her coat and a tired smile. She found Lena in the kitchen, cutting bread with hands she could not make steady. Blue would not settle. He moved between Ruth and the hallway, restless in a way Ruth noticed. "What's wrong with him?" Lena asked. Ruth looked at the dog, then at Lena. Sometimes animals know when a house isn't peaceful. Lena turned back to the bread. Ruth found out before dark. Not everything. Not yet. But enough. The open drawer. The missing envelope. The way Lena answered too fast when asked if she had been in the office. Ruth did not shout. She sat at the kitchen table and placed both hands flat on the wood. "Lena," she said, "tell me this is not what I think it is." There were still ways back. Lena could have cried. She could have confessed. She could have said Silas's name and let the truth arrive ugly but alive. Instead, she felt the old terror close around her. If she told the truth, Ruth would see her. Not the girl in the blue room. Not the girl Ruth hoped she could become. The other one. The Crowe girl. The liar. The thief. The thing Mill Creek had always expected. So Lena did what she knew how to do. She looked Ruth in the eye and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." The silence that followed was worse than anger. Ruth's face changed, not because she believed Lena, but because she understood that Lena had chosen the lie even after being offered the door. For the first time, Lena saw trust leave someone in real time. It did not slam. It did not scream. It simply stood up from the table and walked out. Lena wanted to call it back. She did not. By then, the lie had already begun to feel like the only wall left between her and being thrown away. Ruth Bell did not call the police that night. For the rest of Lena's life, that would be one fact she could never fit inside a simple story. Ruth had proof enough to be afraid. An open drawer, a missing envelope, and a girl at her kitchen table who had looked her in the eye and lied with the calm of someone already halfway gone. Still, Ruth did not reach for the phone. She locked the office door. She checked the porch. She fed Blue, though the old dog kept turning toward the stairs as if the house made a sound only he could hear. Then Ruth made tea. That was what undid Lena more than shouting would have. A woman who screamed could be hated. A woman who called the sheriff could become the enemy. But Ruth set 2 cups on the table as if the night could still become a conversation instead of a fracture. "Sit down," Ruth said. Lena stayed by the counter. "I'm tired." "I know. You don't know anything." Ruth looked older in the kitchen light, worn where hope had rubbed against disappointment too many times. She did not answer the insult. She only said, "Tell me the truth before someone else pays for it." The sentence landed softly. That made it worse. Lena gripped the counter. She could feel the lie inside her, alive and ready. A story about Toby. A story about a stranger. A story about Ruth misplacing things. Any of them might buy her another hour. But not all hours were worth buying. Blue lowered himself beside Ruth's chair with a tired sigh. Lena remembered the first night in the blue room, the lamp still on, the old dog sleeping outside her door like a promise nobody had spoken. For 1 second, the right thing came close enough to touch. "I didn't mean for it to get this bad," Lena whispered. Ruth's face changed. Not with victory, with grief. "Then don't let it get worse." Those words opened something in Lena, and for a moment everything almost spilled out. Silas, the money, the folder, the old report, the anger she had carried for weeks. She wanted to say all of it, enough to stop drowning in her own version of the story. Then fear arrived. It came in her mother's voice. "Liar." It came in Silas's voice. "Family first." It came in the imagined voice of the whole town, waiting to say it had been right about her. Ruth would look at her differently. Nora would hear. The diner would close to her. The blue room would stop being hers. Every clean sheet and porch light would become evidence of what she had not deserved. Lena pulled back from the edge of confession. "You already decided it was me," she said. "I am asking you to tell me what happened." "You mean you're asking me to make it easier for you to throw me out?" Ruth's hand tightened around the cup. "Is that what you think this is?" Lena laughed once, sharp and empty. "I know about the file." The kitchen went still. Ruth did not pretend not to understand. That was another chance Ruth gave her, by refusing to lie. "You found the report?" Ruth said. "You knew." "Yes." The word struck Lena like a door slammed shut. "You knew, and I still went back there." Ruth's eyes filled, but her voice stayed steady. "I reported what I saw. So did Miss Palmer. I called the county twice after that. I was told there was no immediate finding. I was told it would be reviewed. I was a substitute teacher, with no custody rights and no power to take you from that house." Lena shook her head. That's convenient. It is awful, Ruth said. It is not convenient. You wrote urgent. I did. And then what? You went home? Ruth flinched. Some part of the words had found an old guilt she had never put down. Yes, she said quietly. I went home, and I have regretted that for years. There it was. The apology Lena had thought she wanted. But when it arrived, it did not heal her. It made her angrier. Regret was too small. It did not go back into the trailer. It did not stand between a child and a mother who needed silence. It did not erase the word that had followed Lena through school, diner booths, county offices, and Ruth's hallway. You felt bad, Lena said. That must have been hard. Ruth accepted the cruelty without returning it. Yes, she said, but my regret does not give you the right to steal from me now. The sentence cut through the room cleanly. For a heartbeat, Lena hated her. Not because Ruth was wrong, because she was not. Ruth leaned forward. I failed you when you were a child. Maybe not alone. Maybe not the way you think. But I did not do enough. I will carry that. But you are not a child tonight. You are old enough to know what you did with that envelope. You are old enough to choose what happens next. Lena stared at the table. Choose. The word felt impossible. People with choices had cars, mothers who answered phones, names that did not come already stained. People with choices did not have brothers like Silas waiting in alleys, reminding them that blood was the only thing they could not be evicted from. But another part of her knew Ruth was right. That was the part Lena hated most. Ruth gave her until morning. Bring back the envelope. Tell the truth about who had it. Cut ties with Silas. If she did that, they would go to Nora together, then to someone who could help. If you lie to me again, Ruth said, I will call the sheriff. Lena looked at the old woman, at Blue beside her chair, at the warm kitchen that had almost become a home. She wanted to fall apart. Instead, she stood up. You should have called him years ago, Lena said. Then she walked upstairs before Ruth could see her face change. In the blue room, Lena shut the door and pressed both hands over her mouth. Not to stop herself from crying, to stop herself from calling Ruth back. Because if Ruth offered mercy one more time, Lena was afraid she might take it. And taking mercy meant admitting she had almost destroyed the only person who had ever left a light on for her. Lena did not sleep. She sat on the edge of the blue bed until the room lost its shape in the dark. Ruth was downstairs. Blue was somewhere in the hall. The house was quiet in the way a house becomes quiet after something has been said that cannot be taken back. By morning, that was what Ruth had given her. Not forever. Not even a week. Just until morning to bring back the envelope, say Silas's name, and choose whether the truth would still have a place to stand. Lena tried to imagine doing it. Walking downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table, telling Ruth where the envelope had gone, saying she was sorry without turning the apology into a weapon, letting Ruth be angry, letting Nora know, letting the sheriff ask questions. The thought made her throat close, because in Lena's mind, confession never ended with mercy. It ended with doors closing. It ended with people looking at her the way Denise had looked at her. Not disappointed. Confirmed. See? That was who you were all along. Before sunrise, Lena climbed out the bedroom window onto the porch roof and dropped into the wet grass. She told herself she was not running from Ruth. She was only finding Silas so she could fix things before the morning made them permanent. But deep down, she knew the truth. She was looking for someone who would tell her she did not have to be wrong. Silas was behind the laundromat, smoking under the broken security light. He looked annoyed before he looked worried. That should have told her enough. She knows, Lena said. Silas exhaled. How much? That I took it. You told her? No. Then she doesn't know. She suspects. She said she'll call the sheriff. Silas gave a short laugh. Of course she did. Lena heard the trap in his voice and stepped toward it anyway. She gave me until morning. To do what? Crawl? Beg? Hand me over? To tell the truth. Silas looked at her then, and his face softened in the exact way Ruth's had not. Ruth's softness asked Lena to become better. Silas's softness gave her permission to stay wounded. You really think she'll keep you after that? He asked. Lena said nothing. You think that old woman's gonna sit at breakfast with a thief? You think she's gonna let you sleep upstairs after you admit you stole from her? Lena, people like that don't forgive us. They collect proof. The word proof tightened around her chest. Silas saw it. She had a file on you, didn't she? Lena looked up. She kept papers, watched you, wrote you down. That ain't love. That's a record. A record. That was how he made Ruth's house turn cold in Lena's mind. Not by inventing a new lie, but by placing the old wound over the present until the two shapes matched. Ruth's folders became Denise's doorway. Ruth's warning became the county woman's notes. Ruth's deadline became abandonment dressed up as morality. Lena knew some part of this was wrong. Ruth had fed her. Ruth had waited up. Ruth had said, "You are old enough to choose." But fear is not fair. Fear takes the evidence that hurts least and burns the rest. Silas stepped closer. People like us don't get saved, Crow girl. We get used. That sentence finished what the night had started. Lena walked away from him without a plan she could name. She passed the gas station, the diner, the road back to the trailer park. At 3 different corners, she could have turned toward help. Nora's diner had lights on in the kitchen. Deputy Harlan's cruiser sat outside the station. Even Miss Palmer's old street was only 6 blocks away. Lena saw all of those roads. She chose none of them. By the time she reached Ruth's boarding house, dawn had begun to gray the sky. The porch light was still on. That almost stopped her. Almost. Inside, the house smelled of old wood and tea. Ruth was awake in the kitchen, still dressed from the night before, as if she had known Lena would not come down the stairs like a person ready to be saved. "You went to him," Ruth said. Lena hated that Ruth could hear the truth before she spoke. "You were going to call the sheriff. I was going to help you tell the truth." "No," Lena said. "You were going to put me in another file." Ruth closed her eyes. When she opened them, the grief was gone. Not the love, the permission. "Lena," she said, "bring me the envelope." That was the last simple sentence between them. What happened after that would be told in court through timelines, fragments, testimony, and the kind of careful language people use when the full truth is too heavy to place in one room. Henry Lott crossed the yard because he thought Ruth needed help. Carly May was nearby because she had come looking for Blue. Blue, who had once slept outside Lena's door, moved toward the voices the way loyal creatures do, believing a house can still be protected by love. The details do not need to be repeated here. What matters is the choice before the silence. Lena had chances. Not perfect ones, not easy ones, but real ones. She could have left. She could have dropped to the floor and told the truth. She could have let Ruth hate her and still remain alive to hate her. She could have allowed the mourning to become a consequence instead of a tragedy. She did not. By the time the first sirens came down the road, Ruth Bell was gone. Henry Lott was gone. Blue was gone. And Carly May, 9 years old, was alive in a way no one in Mill Creek would ever again call lucky. Lena sat on the back steps with mud on her shoes and the envelope still not worth what it had cost. She had gone into that house terrified Ruth would call her a liar. She left it having made the word monster something no one could take back. The trial did not give Mill Creek peace. Trials rarely do. They gave the town a timeline. They gave Ruth Bell a date of death, Henry Lott a final act, Carly May a title no child should have to carry, and Lena Crowe a chair beside a public defender who had run out of ways to make pain sound smaller than responsibility. The courtroom was full the morning the sentence came. People stood along the back wall. Some had known Ruth from school. Some had eaten at her kitchen table when the boarding house still took in workers passing through. Some had known Henry as the man who waved at every child on a bicycle. Others came because tragedy makes even decent people curious. Carly May did not speak. She sat beside her grandmother with her hands around the stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere after that night. No one asked her to address the court. No one tried to turn her silence into a performance. Everyone understood that surviving was not the same as being spared. The prosecutor rose first. He did not call Lena a monster this time. Maybe he did not need to. The facts had done the work already. Instead, he spoke the names. Ruth Bell, Henry Lott, Carly May. Blue, he said. Ruth had not been a symbol. She had been a retired teacher with bad knees, unpaid bills, and a habit of feeding people who had nowhere else to go. Henry had not been part of Lena's story until he saw danger and crossed the yard, because helping was the kind of man he had spent his life being. Carly May would grow up with a before and an after that no sentence could close. When he mentioned Blue, he did so carefully, not as if an animal's life outweighed the human lives lost, but as part of what the house had been. A place where an old dog slept outside a frightened girl's door, and trust had once seemed possible. Lena looked down. Her public defender stood next. Claire Voss had spent months building the only argument she could ethically make, not that Lena was innocent, but that a broken child had once been failed by nearly everyone responsible for seeing her. She spoke of the trailer under the water tower, of Denise Crowe, of Miss Palmer's report, of a county system that took notes where action was needed. She said Lena had learned to survive by lying long before she understood what lying could become. Then Claire turned slightly toward Ruth's empty family bench. But explanation is not absolution, she said, and childhood pain does not give an adult permission to turn other people into casualties of that pain. For the first time that morning, Lena closed her eyes. Maybe those were the words she had been avoiding all her life. Maybe she had wanted someone to say the first half without the second. Yes, you were hurt. Yes, you were failed. Yes, someone should have come for you. But also this, you still chose. You chose not to ask Ruth about the file. You chose Silas when you knew what he was. You chose the envelope. You chose the lie at the kitchen table. You chose to climb out the window instead of walking downstairs. You chose the road that led back to the boarding house when other roads were still open. Regret could stand beside those choices. It could not erase them. When Judge Miriam Cole finally spoke, the courtroom seemed to shrink around her voice. She said the court had considered Lena's history, neglect, instability, and the failure of adults who should have protected her. None of that was irrelevant. Then she looked at Lena directly. But the law cannot sentence the child you were, the judge said. It must sentence the woman who made choices after she knew the cost of being betrayed. Lena did not cry. Not then. The judge imposed life without the possibility of parole. The words were formal, heavy, plain. They landed like a door that would never open again. Some people exhaled. Some wept. Ruth's niece lowered her head. Henry's son stared straight ahead. Carly May pressed the rabbit against her chest and made no sound. Lena was led away without a final speech. That mattered. There are stories where the person who caused the harm gets the last line, the last look, the last chance to explain themselves into something softer. This should not be one of those stories. The last word belongs to the names left behind. Ruth Bell, who opened a room to a girl everyone else had stopped wanting. Henry Lott, who crossed a yard because decency sometimes moves faster than fear. Carly May, who lived but carried a silence no child should have been asked to hold. And Blue, who had once believed a closed door could mean safety because the girl behind it was finally home. Years later, the boarding house still stood on the edge of Mill Creek. The porch sagged. The windows darkened. Weeds climbed the fence. The water tower still rose beyond the trailer park, unchanged and useless as a witness. People still argued about Lena Crowe. Some said she had been born wrong. Others said the town had helped make her and then acted surprised when the damage came back wearing a human face. Both answers were too easy. Lena had been a child erased by one lie. That part was true. But she became a woman who chose lies even when truth stood in front of her with a warm kitchen, an old dog, and one last chance to come home. Understanding where the darkness began does not mean forgiving what it became. And in Mill Creek, the saddest truth was not that no one had ever tried to save Lena Crowe. It was that someone finally did, and Lena destroyed her.